NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
Welcome, listeners, to this special production of the National Writing Project. We're really excited about this feature series of NWP Radio called The Story of the Poem, where I have the chance to talk to poets about being a poet, the story behind the poem, and a craft feature of the poem. Each episode will end with an opportunity to give it a go. In other words, an invitation from the poet to craft a poem or a few lines or use a technique that the poet has highlighted. We hope these writing invitations will spur you to start or keep on writing after the episode, or give you something new to try in your classroom. I am Tanya Baker, Director of National Programs at the National Writing Project, and for each episode, I'll have the honor and the pleasure of welcoming our guests and our listeners to spend a few minutes diving deep into poetry. Today, I'm so excited to introduce poet T.L. Sanders. Poet, aka a twist, the language artist, is a modern-day Renaissance man who lives to build minds and loves to bodybuild. He speaks French, he plays bass, he's a cage-fighting martial artist, he educates. Give him a stage, he articulates. Lend him an ear, he motivates. As Paper Birch Landing Art Gallery's 2019 Poet in Resident recipient, a National Writing Project teacher consultant, a current curriculum director, and a former elementary, middle, and high school English teacher with 16 years of teaching experience, Poet embraces the value of our shared stories. Whether he is public speaking, teaching, writing, or breathing, he has a passion for empowering people. Poet, welcome.
Thank you, Tanya. So awesome to be here.
We're so excited to have you. We'd love to start by having you tell us how or why you became a poet.
Well, actually, it started with the Summer Institute. I'm a Prairie Lands Writing Project teacher consultant. And during our SI, our Summer Institute, I had an opportunity to play with words for 6 weeks. And I decided to write all poetry. Everything we did, no matter what it was, we did writing marathons, poetry. If we had to make a list, poetry. Everything was poetry. And it started something, an initiative almost that has not ended. It's just grown and grown and grown. So truly, my SI started this party for me.
That is my favorite answer of all the poets I've interviewed this month. That's so exciting. You brought a poem to share with us today. I believe you are going to share and talk about your poem, This.
Yes.
Could we start by having you read it for us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It goes like this. Arose a whisper into the window awakens to chasten the query. While chasing the quarry, the distance traveled, not by miles, but in minutes. This momentum lessens the limits for siblings living in infinite centuries. July the 16th, Elizabeth Jennings, organist, teacher, worship leader, is 104 years running on her way to Sunday service for God's sake. In this minute, Miss Jennings, by faith, breaks the color barrier. She Rosa Parks herself on the streetcar next to nascent words whispered into the window, in the 5th row, on the metro. Montgomery, will you ride with me? This quote grows hope evergreen, and persistence climbs high like ivy's flowers tower, ivory towers, with one goal: courage to drive initiative. She is time. Her arrival is destined to revive this whisper, because time rights wrongs with an editing pencil. Thus time writes songs and poems and performs symphonic similes similar to tunes of jazz and two-tone blues, and sentimental, colorful, classical, autobiographical, synchronous words whispered into the window, This time is 16-year-old Maya Angelou, a conductor for the on-the-ground railroad, San Francisco streetcar. Yes, Dr. Angelo said it best. Still, like dust, I'll rise, bringing the gifts ancestors gave before 400 years ago. Much more than a slave we are before the ocean brought boats to the coast, Côte d'Ivoire, before the land bought, the folk stole, the who we are before windows, before whispers, before words, before gibberish. Quit limiting Black history to 4 centuries. Start whispering into the window. Ignorance is temporal. Wisdom is infinity, and infinity is invisible will. You ride with me. Never a question, it is essence. Introspection, expecting the will to ride alongside. Mrs. Parks was correct when she said in that moment was the exact spot she was supposed to be sitting at will. You ride with me. Miss Jennings, winning from the beginning, stood tall on the backs of ancestral siblings who came before her. Now it is Lizzie who understands tall, for she is our earth, on whom we stand tall. Will you ride with me? Dr. Maya believed that she shined light on those night roads in spite of Black codes coached by Jim Crow when folks' goal was to hurt her. An absurdity. We are observing phenomenal women who walk into a room just as cool as you please. On their command, the fellows stand or fall down on their knees because the will of these queens is a hive of honeybees. It is written in a poem called Phenomenal Woman, literally a literary will. You ride with me. Never a question for Harriet Tubman. When it came to saving slaves' lives, her train rides rode focused and free from within, like these Kansas City streetcars. Have a transit app? Mama Moses, the map, would unload boats of cargo to go right back through the Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Less for the amusement and more for the movement, which led to liberty or death. Let's expect strong will to ride, even when the freight fretted the route ahead en route to the depot. General Tubman would open her soul to show the words whispered into the window. Then she would whisper into their ears, fears ride too. But that's why we win though. The will is the constant. Wasn't an option. Isn't an option. Won't be an option. Whispered into the window is will. You ride with me. Thank you.
Woo, that is a ride. I will ride with you.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I am noting, as you know, for the first listen, this beautiful play of like sort of power and play in language, and sort of joy in shared struggle that comes across as these tensions of things that people don't always think go together, like playfulness and powerfulness and joyfulness and struggle is really evident to me when I hear you bring those words to life.
Yes.
Can you tell us the story of this poem? Where did it come from and how did it develop?
Absolutely. Well, in Kansas City, that's where I am from. Well, that's where I live. I'm from Indianapolis, but we were celebrating Black culture during February, and the Kansas City Streetcar Authority gathered this beautiful artistry where beautiful, wonderful fruit was growing and flourishing. I was among the artistry. There were dancers, musicians, other poets. Our mayor was also on there, on the artistry. And when I learned that this was streetcar, I immediately thought about, well, what does the streetcar have to do with movement? In fact, one of the things that streetcar says is it's art in the loop. And it's a vehicle not only to take people literally, but also a vehicle for progress. And so those things stuck with me. It was the communications director, Donna, and I really picked her brain about theme and goals, and she was so gracious to allow me, right? And so then I thought, who was on public transportation? And then I thought, of course, Rosa Parks, right? The rightful apple of our eye. Well, that apple didn't fall too far from the tree because there is a woman named Elizabeth Jennings Graham. So Rosa Parks was 1955, 1954. Elizabeth Jennings Graham was 1854. So there's 100 years, right, of a span. Elizabeth Jennings Graham was actually on the streetcar. And so then I'm like, okay, who else is on the streetcar, right? So whenever I write, especially if I'm hired to write something, then I want to know about characters. What characters do I need to include, right? And then, so I found Rosa Parks, of course, Elizabeth Jennings Graham, but then I found that Dr. Maya Angelou literally was a streetcar conductor. I mean, it was like,
right.
It was falling from the sky. I'm like, okay, I'll take that too, right? And so, so when I learned that, then I'm like, okay, if Dr. Maya Angelou is the streetcar conductor for the on-the-ground railroad, then we have to include one more, right?
Indeed.
Harriet Tubman, Underground Railroad. And so these four women were the characters. And there's one other thing that I mentioned. It says, stop limiting Black history to 4 centuries, right? Now, some people will hear that as 400 years. However, I would like to expand that thinking because at the beginning it says, arose a whisper into the window awakens to chasten the query, which is a question, to say, this is not a question. It's not, will you ride with me? That's not a question. So it chastens that question while chasing the quarry, trying to get our hunt on, the distance traveled, not by miles, but in minutes. This is the part I want to highlight. This momentum lessens the limits. This momentum, hang on, let me make sure that I'm not lying to you. Lessens the limits. Okay, lessens the limits for siblings living in infinite centuries. And so when it says stop limiting Black history to 4 centuries, we have Rosa Parks, not in, of course, chronological order, Rosa Parks, Elizabeth Jennings Graham, right? Dr. Maya Angelou and Harriet Tubman. These are the 4 centuries. And so even though even I am limiting this work to 4 centuries, I'm talking to myself because this work is much bigger than the 4 centuries that represent this poem. Yes, and so that's really where the work started, with Kansas City Streetcar Authority, finding these artists. And then I had the privilege of looking at what streetcar represents and exploding that moment. And then the last thing I'll say, so of course, we're celebrating who for this month? Women, right? And so
I'm like, what
I don't
month
know
am I
how
in?
appropriate
Women.
this is, but when we look here, can you see that American Women on the Move?
Yes, I can.
Yes. The lighting wasn't favorable on that side, so I had to move over here. But we're celebrating women, right? And so this poem has leverage. Where will we be without women? Where will we be without these women, right? And so it has leverage. And I just had to continue this conversation with the poem I wrote for February, because we don't have to relegate Black history to 1 month, and we don't have to relegate women's history to 1 month, right? Because so I'm gonna stop because I'm gonna.
You and I are talking in March, and we could say one more thing, right? Which is when audiences pick up this webinar, it will be April, and we will be celebrating National Poetry Month, this huge crush of poetry for 1 month, but we would say that about poetry too. And where would we be without poetry? And we don't have to limit it to this 1 month. So,
and did you know that is also African-American Women's History Month in April?
Brilliant. I did not, I should know that, obviously.
So, I mean, it just continues. So yes.
That is a beautiful story about how this poem came to be and helped us probably to hear some of it differently. I'm wondering, poet, if you would read an excerpt for us so that we can hear the words with this new story in our minds.
Yes, and I'm going to start with the beginning where we hear Rosa mentioned. And if you look at the poem, it says a Rosa whisper.
Yes.
Now, I like double entendre as a writer. I like homophones from all the types of them, from the graphs to the nyms. And I also, there are other things that I illusion. But so when we listen to this first word, listen closely to what I say. A Rosa whisper. Not a Rosa whisper, but whose whisper is it? A Rosa whisper into the window awakens. To chasten the query, while chasing the quarry, the distance traveled, not by miles, but in minutes. This momentum lessens the limits for siblings living in infinite centuries. July the 16th, allusion, Elizabeth Jennings, organist, teacher, worship leader, is 104 years running on her way to Sunday service for God's sake. In this minute, Miss Jennings by faith breaks the color barrier. She Rosa parks herself on the streetcar next to nascent words whispered, where? In the window, where? In the fifth row, where? On the metro, where? Montgomery, who? That's Rosa Parks.
Ooh.
Right?
Yes.
And so if I go back 104 years, where's that from? Well, we can think of Abraham Lincoln and we can think of Dr. King. I stole that from them. That's not mine. I was like, okay, these guys said this, so I'm gonna say it. And so, yes. And there's illusion. And so I'll share one more little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So Montgomery, will you ride with me? This quote grows hope evergreen and persistence climbs high like ivy's flowers tower, ivory towers with one goal, courage. I really like that line because evergreen is forever, right?
Right.
Infinite.
Right.
It transcends everything.
Right.
And so too this legacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so too courage. That's what we remember about people.
Right.
And
right.
Courage to what? The last part I'll share, because I have to include Dr. Maya Angelou in this reread. Courage to drive initiative. She is time. Her arrival is destined to revive this whisper, because time rights wrongs with an editing pencil. Thus, time writes songs and poems and performs. I mean, I'm going to stop right there, right? Because that's what Dr. Maya Angelou did.
Exactly. So much fun and power in this language play.
Yes.
She Rosa
yes.
Parks herself is
yes.
just exquisite fun.
And you know what? I love, like I said, homophones and the whole group, but parks, what do kids do at a park? They play.
Yeah, right.
And so that's another reason why I love that section, because there was no play when she was sitting in that fifth row. She was where she was supposed to be.
Right.
And that's another part in the work. Can I jump to that really quickly?
Yes.
The where Rosa was supposed to be.
Yes.
It says, Rosa Parks was correct. When she sat in that moment was the exact spot she was supposed to be sitting at will. Now, a lot of people think that she was sitting in the wrong spot and she was asked to move. The story behind it is the African Americans could sit in the fifth row. That was the first row for African Americans. It was the metro was too full. So they had to make another row for our European American siblings. And so she was supposed to move back out of her row where she was supposed to be sitting to the next row, the second row. And she was like, not today, not today. So she was correct when she sat in that moment, which is another double entendre, because that moment was really an awakening for so many things. The Montgomery bus boycott,
Right.
and it allows for tenacious, silent courage that doesn't necessarily take place on a bus. It can take place in a classroom. It can take place in a mirror, you know, and it starts with a whisper, like determination, will you ride with me? So yes, okay.
The multiple levels of will in there are
Yes.
also amazing. So, poet, one of the things we're doing with the show is asking poets to think about their craft and what an aspiring poet might learn from the way you've put this poem together. So I'm wondering what you could tell us about the craft of poetry as we can see it in this poem. And I actually could start to name a million things that I saw. So I know it's rich. I know it's a rich teaching text, but what would you point an aspiring poet to notice and pay attention to?
Well, first, I have to mention the word craft. Let's just think about that one word. Aircraft, a boat is a craft, right? A fox can use craft, right? In a sly way.
Right.
And writers use craft. I mean, it's arts and crafts. That one word opens the door to a whole new world of windows and doors and ways to communicate with people, right? So when we think of craft, I go with devices. I look in my toolbox and I just pull out the first devices that speak to my now, right? Sound devices and figurative language devices. And then I think about the emotion for the moment. What is it that I want to do? I was very intentional for that poem, not speaking to not highlighting the struggle of African Americans as victims, right?
Yes.
I wanted to highlight these women as leaders.
Yes.
There's a part where it talks about Harriet Tubman, and she was afraid whenever she picked up passengers. And there's a part where it says, fear rides too, but that's why we window, right? Yeah. That's why we win though. No. But it's really, if we look at the spelling, that's why we window. And I wanted to be intentional about that emotion. So, and then the next thing are the characters, the action, the resolution, and then the setting. Whenever I'm writing, I generally find how I could use these things. And if I can't, then I just move them out of the way. But devices, emotion, characters, action, resolution, and setting. That's how I start. And in this piece, I tried to stick with the A's so that way we can kind of have a mnemonic, right? Allusion, anaphora, and alliteration. Those 3 A's would get you all A's. You're number 1 in the class. So when we think about illusion, obviously we've talked about that. We have the 4 greats, right? We have Rosa Parks, and I'm going to do it in order, right? Okay. We're going to start with Harriet Tubman, Elizabeth Jennings Graham. I'm going to actually say Rosa Parks because she's older than Dr. Maya Angelou, and then Dr. Maya Angelou. We have those women as the illusion, and then we have anaphora. I'm going to go back to a section that says, which we'll note if you think about craft, just like an aircraft or a boat, they have commonalities, and so there's a mélange. A mixture of things, right? And so you'll hear a mixture, you'll hear illusion in this. Let's see, you'll hear all 3 of these things in this section I'm going to share. All right, let's see if you can point them out.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Yes, Dr. Angelou said it best. Still like dust I'll rise, bringing the gifts ancestors gave before 400 years ago, much more than a slave we are. Before the ocean bought boats to the coast, Côte d'Ivoire, before the land bought folks stole the who we are, before windows, before whispers, before words, before gibberish. that's where I'm going to stop. So, I mean, where is the anaphora? Before, right? Where is the illusion? There's a new illusion that I didn't mention. Still like dust, I'll rise, bringing the gifts ancestors gave, right? I stole that. That's Dr. Maya Angelou. I'll put it in quotes though. If you read the poem, you'll see, okay? All right, because I've got to bow down to her, right? And so, and of course it says Dr. Angelou. And Côte d'Ivoire, which is the Ivory Coast, is French, mais je parle français, donc j'ai besoin d'utiliser les choses comme ça, tous les fois. Oui. I have to use those things because, you know, I speak French, and so I got to include it. So we have illusion, we have anaphora, and then alliteration, windows, whispers, words. I mean, and it's throughout. So, Côte d'Ivoire, brought boats. Before brought boats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that section includes all three components of the devices that I was intentional about incorporating. And the last thing I'll say to writers in general, one, when you play with alliteration, and even if let's say that you played with form, sometimes I'll put in a haiku in a stanza or a limerick in a stanza, because that changes the mood, right? The tempo, the rhythm, the feeling. And then you shift it again. That way we are getting back to another opportunity to experience the words in a different way. So, yes.
Amazing. This poem is so rich. I would just like to ask you one follow-up question, poet, about this craft.
Absolutely.
Does it all just come out in the first draft with all of this stuff?
You can see the numbers of times that I had to revise this. Ironically, this piece is, I want to say I had 10 days to do this.
Whoa.
Because they called us February, maybe less than that, like 10 days to memorize it. So let alone write it. And so they called us, February had already started and we wanted to start filming. I think it was the 19th, 26th or something like that. But anyway, it starts with, just like I said, a list. Whenever I'm on a time crunch, whenever writers are on a time crunch, it's best to organize your ideas, no matter what genre, outline that, get in the car, right? Vehicle, the car, get in the car, craft. That's my outline. And so I know that I need to use sound and images, my devices. And I know that I want to speak to emotion, right? So if I can identify those, then that encourages other craft like structure. I didn't mention structure, but remember I alluded to limericks and haiku, right? And so from there, I start to play with it, kind of taking a sidetrack. Something else, syllables, right? If you play with syllables, then that can play with, that can encourage your rhythm, right? So you may not use form, but you just may match the syllables, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The thing, as far as the syllables, the thing that comes to mind is chastens the query, chasing the quarry, right? So those two have the same amount of syllables, so they feel good together, like fraternal twins. And those happen in the revision process. So you identify your devices, and then you figure out how you can strengthen them to highlight them, right?
Nice.
Yes.
Someone just opened and closed the door in this room. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
They were nicely trying to bring me some food, but that's a little, sorry, that's a little aside, listeners.
But the thing is, I mean, if you think about it though, I mean, writers have to eat.
They have to eat.
I didn't mention that part because I was eating along the way. That was most important.
Were you when you only had 10 days?
So yes, please eat, my sister. Please eat.
That is lovely. And I think gives people a lot. I also just want to come back to this. You've created this powerful, historically rich, forward-looking, future-looking piece of writing. And the word I feel like you've used the most to describe how it's done is play.
Yes.
It seems like you have played a lot along the way to build a thing. And I think we don't, I mean, I should speak for my former self, say enough about joyful play when
Yes.
we teach writers. And I think this is a lovely lesson to share.
Yes, absolutely.
So now that we've heard you talk about all of these pieces, would you mind once again reading a segment for us so that we can listen with our attuned ears for that?
Absolutely. And I'm going to close with Harriet Tubman, because she actually started the party, if you really think about it. Yeah. While she and Elizabeth Jennings Graham were in the same time, they were in different worlds. So side skip, if you go to my website, I've put links so you can click and you can learn about the history within the poem, because there's so much. But I want to start with, in this last segment, Harriet Tubman, because she's really the conductor who connected. She's the vehicle that connected it all. All right, so I'll start here. Will you ride with me was never a question for Harriet Tubman. When it came to saving slaves' lives, her train rides rode focused and free from within, like these Kansas City streetcars have a transit app. Mama Moses, the map, would unload boats of cargo to go right back through the Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, less for the amusement and more for the movement which led to liberty or death. Let's expect strong will to ride, even when the freight fretted the road ahead en route to the depot. General Tubman would open her soul to show the words whispered into the window. Then she would whisper into their ears. Fears ride too. But that's why we win, though. The will is the constant. Wasn't an option. Wasn't isn't an option. Wasn't won't be an option. Whispered into the window is will. You ride with me. That is that.
That is that indeed. Ooh, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Absolutely.
This is the part of the show where we ask people to give it a go. So would you, poet, offer us a provocation or invitation or assignment?
Yes. Fellow writers, I invite you to play.
Nice.
That's what I invite you to do.
Nice.
I invite you to play. So I want you to get in the car and play. What's in your toolbox? Simile, metaphor? Third graders, I know you know what a simile is. Bring that bad boy out. Personification? Fifth graders, I know you know what personification is. Pull it out. Anaphora, I know you guys are reading the I Have a Dream speech. Ninth graders, pull that bad boy out. And 12th grade, illusion. Find some illusion, right, that can connect to your audience. First thing that I suggest always, devices, find emotion, and then a fitting character, action, resolution, and then setting. Make a list. After that, continue to play. One of the things that I love to do, when you think about homophones, a cool activity could be to give an image or a text. So it can be a video text, it can be a picture text, it can be a written text, a poem, any genre, right? And then provide a list of homophones, right? And then let the students pick 2 to 5 groups. Some students may need to pick more, but hey, it's up to you and your students. And after that, give them room to play. Let them write a stanza. A stanza. How long is a stanza? 25 lines? There's nothing wrong with a 25-line stanza. And there's nothing wrong with a 2-line stanza, right?
Yeah.
So give them room to play. That is what I invite you, fellow writers, to do. Play.
Brilliant. Poet, it has been a joy to play and hear the powerful outcomes of that play with you today. So thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank listeners or watchers who are experiencing this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And if you have, and you are not yet familiar with the National Writing Project, we are glad that you joined us here today, and we would love to have you with us again. So go to our website, nwp.org, and sign up for our monthly newsletter so you never miss any opportunities like this one, because really you wouldn't have wanted to miss this. And Poet, could you please share your website again? Because you have so many rich resources, and this poem was such a delight. I'm sure people are going to want to see it again and spend some time in it.
Absolutely. PoetTLSanders.com. And you'll go to Poet's Poems for Prose, and it'll take you there.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.